Drums can be challenging to mix. It's more of a collection of instruments than just one instrument. They're loud as hell. Do you mic them up with 3 microphones? Do you mic them up with 12 microphones? Do you put 2 microphones on one drum? There's a lot of questions to answer, so in this video we're going to take a look at getting the best live drum sound that we possibly can. There's a lot involved in getting a good drum sound, and a lot of that comes down to the drummer and the tuning of the drums. We as audio engineers need to be really confident in what we want so that we have time to focus on the other elements of that as well and getting the drummer to get what they want out of it. This all starts with understanding the drums and the drummer. Every drummer plays slightly differently and lots of drums sound different as well. There's a sort of inherent level balance that you desire to get out of a drum kit, but because of this sort of size and power and volume of a drum kit, you need to get the player to deliver that kind of volume balance. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do much about it in a small venue with microphones. Cymbals should be a lot quieter than you think. If you've got a really heavy hitter and they're coming right hard down on the crash, it's basically impossible to get a great drum sound because you're always going to be fighting that crash cymbal. If you're in a medium to small venue, then you're trying to bring everything else up in the band to meet that sound. Similarly, if the drummer is not hitting that kick drum with force, then you're never going to get that punchy sounding kick. It's always going to sound not full of impact. That kind of stuff comes down to the player. Also, we need to talk about tuning of the drums. If the drums are out of tune, or if the heads are not appropriate, that's the skins on the top of the drum. If they are not appropriate to the genre, or they're not tuned appropriately, then you're not going to get the sound that you desire. If you want a great fat sounding snare drum like you hear in pop records, then you need to start with a snare drum that sounds that way. If you have a really cracky, high-pitched snare drum a la Red Hot Chili Peppers or Limp Bizkit or something, then you're never going to get that pop-sounding snare because you don't have it to begin with. If you hear something that comes out of the PA when you turn that microphone up and it doesn't sound the way that you want it to, instead of reaching for the EQ, try muting the channel on the PA, going up to the drummer and listening to the drum. And if the drum sounds like total crap when you're standing in front of it, then your microphone is not going to be able to make it sound good. Get out a roll of gaffer tape. Start taping up the sides of the drums until you kind of reduce that wobbly sound and give yourself a bit of intensity. Before you start bringing any microphones into your system, it's really important that you have a good sounding PA system, that you have tuned your PA properly and that you're confident that all of the speakers are positioned correctly and left is left and right is right. When you're going to EQ your PA, you probably want to get a hold of my 3-step guide to perfect EQ, which will give you some frameworks to EQing any source. It's going to help you a lot in this whole process. So check that out, offshoreaudio.no/EQ, or link in the description below this video. Get that guide up on your phone when you're going to mix these drums and it will help you out. But let's chat about miking it up, right? If I have my way, I like to have a microphone on every single drum and 2 microphones on both the kick drum and the snare drum. I find that that gives me more diversity in sound and I can blend the sort of elements together in the way that I want. A microphone on the top of the snare and a microphone on the bottom of the snare, a microphone inside the kick drum, and the microphone sort of just outside the kick drum. And if you're using overheads, think about positioning here. When I'm using overheads, I'm kind of using them more like cymbal spot mics, right? I'm not trying to pick up the whole kit unless it's jazz or something. When I'm picking up the cymbals, point those microphones at the cymbals. And I don't care too much about stereo image. For a snare drum, I'm usually using an SM57, and I will try and get that SM57 just above the rim of the drum and sort of pointing across the drum. I like to get it really nice and close because I want to get the proximity effect from that close microphone, and I want to get a bit of the beef from the drum. So the further away you go from the drum, the less bass you're going to get due to less proximity effect. I also like to use a Sennheiser 604 microphone on the underside of the drum. Really easy to just clip on, and then you point that at the bottom. And that gets you a bit of sizzle from the snares, and it can get you a bit more of that sort of snap or that sort of fat sizzly sound from that pop drum that we're talking about. Can you tell I like the sound of that? With the kick drum, I'm going to go for a Beta 91 microphone on the inside. This is almost universally used. So this is a sort of cardioid, half cardioid condenser microphone that you can place on the inside of the kick drum. When you do place it on the inside of the kick drum, make sure it's not in contact with the wood. You want it to be resting on a pillow or something, otherwise you're going to get a really nasty, scrapey sound. On the outside, Shure again, I love myself some Shure microphones. I like a Beta 52, and I like, if there's a porthole, I like to just position it just inside the porthole. For toms, again, it's 604 microphones for me, and I like to just clip them onto the top of it. For the floor tom, I like to lower it a little bit and again, get nice and close to get that big, beefy proximity effect. For hi-hats, any small diaphragm condenser will work for me, and I like to sort of move it over the top of the hats and sort of just out towards the edge from the bell of the hi-hats. The cymbals, again, sort of usually any small diaphragm condensers, but another trick when miking up drum kits is to use tripod stands when you're setting the microphones out. Because if you have round bass stands, you end up taking a lot of room up, and it's quite difficult to maneuver them in amongst the microphones. Tripod stands allows you to just slot the microphone stand into any spaces that you can get, and then get the microphones nice and close to the drums. Especially with a snare drum, it can get really, really difficult. So what you can do is you can just fold the legs up until it's kind of almost packed away, and then slot that microphone stand in where you want it to be, and then unfold the legs underneath the legs of any cymbal stands and stuff there. It's a really good trick to get nice and close to the snare drum. So now we've mic'd up our drum kit, we need to head to the mixer and we need to have a look at gaining the channels up and applying EQ, compression and gating. Let's just start logically with the kick drum, right? I'm not going to go deep into gain theory here because we should know how to gain up a channel. Basically gain it up to about -18 decibels full scale or 0 on a VU meter. And so if I've only got one kick drum mic, it's going to be the microphone on the outside. For your kick drum, you might want a very small high pass filter just to roll off the kind of low stuff. We're talking like 30 hertz here to get any kind of woofiness away and let that sub energy about 50 hertz give you a real punch. If you're not getting enough punch in your system, you could boost a little, about 50, 60 hertz. You probably want to make a cut somewhere around 500 hertz in the sort of low mids there. There's going to be a boominess from being inside a big boomy kick drum, and removing that will give you a sort of tighter bass drum, kick drum sound. And again, if you need more impact, you can give it a little boost in the sort of high mids to the highs. Somewhere between 2K and 5K usually is quite acceptable. If I've got the second drum on the inside, then my tactics are very, very similar, right? I still want to have good punch from that microphone, and I still want to remove any boominess. It's probably going to have enough snap just due to the characteristics of the microphone and the placement of it. On that second microphone, it's important to play with the polarity of the signal and check if that is giving you a kind of richer, fuller sound when the two channels are up equal together. And then it's just a case of blending the two channels together to get the sound that you want. Sort of nice, rich, full, powerful, snappy kick drum sound. Compression wise, I'll usually go in with a kind of 3-to-1 compressor with a fairly fast attack and a fairly fast release, and I'm just kind of looking to even out the impact. Gating, you want to apply a gate and just tweak the threshold and the release time especially to make sure that you get a sort of natural decay. You're going to want to gate this because if you have a lot of sub on your stage, you might end up with low end feedback in your kick drum. Snare drum time, same thing, gain this guy up. Get your high pass filter, drag it up, probably going to go to like 100 hertz here, give or take, use your ears. After that, I usually end up going for a sort of low mid boost, somewhere around 200, 250, if I need more energy in that low end to give it that fat kick drum sound. There's probably another cut somewhere in the low mids, again, 500, 600, 700, somewhere in here, to listening for these qualities and removing them only if they exist. Similarly, if the snare drum is really ringy, you might find me going for a higher frequency in the mids, maybe 1K or something, to try and get out that kind of ring. If you've got a really soft, fat snare drum, you might need to add a little top end, a little 2K, 3K to give it that snap. The under snare mic, similar treatment, probably a much higher filter, probably looking for more snap here, reducing the boxiness in the mids about 500 again. Remembering definitely to invert the polarity on this channel. Bring that into taste to give you that snappy, nice snariness. Compression this time, I'm looking for a sort of slower attack because I want to let that initial transient come through, and then I want to kind of like reduce the dynamic range afterwards to give us this kind of fat sound, this uniform. You want that impact in the beginning though. Again, for the gate, just make sure that you're not demolishing anything, you're not gating it too hard. Bring that up a bit until you know that every snare drum hit is coming through. Pay attention with snare drum gates for ghost notes. If someone starts playing a shuffle on the snare drum, think old school country western stuff, you probably want to turn that gate off. If it's jazz, don't gate it. If anyone takes out any brushes, don't gate it. Toms varies depending on the size of the toms. Again, we're going for that filter after we've gained it up. We're going to roll off some of the low lows, depending if it's a small tom, probably up to almost 100. Low floor tom, probably 40, something like that on the filter. And then again, searching for any boominess. Sometimes 100 can be a bit rough if it's a really deep floor tom. Might just need a little dip, but be very careful because you need that energy in the low frequencies to get the impact of these. Usually somewhere in the low mids you want to cut as well. Again, similar to the kick drum, it's going to round it out. Just go looking for something between 400 and 800. You're probably going to find something. If you get really flabby sounding toms, you probably want to boost it somewhere in the mids, in the high mids, 1K, 2K, to give a bit of that impact. Gating is again super important on toms. Using the gate judiciously can give you a bit more impact, right? You can cut that release time down on the gate. It can make toms snappier than they might otherwise be. And so this is a tactic that you can also use on the kick drum if you're going to end up with a sort of faster attack release cycle, which gives the impression of a snappier kick drum. It's not a great situation to be in. For hats, bringing that filter up quite high, 100, 200 even. Also a low pass filter and bringing some of the high highs, the crispiness of the hi-hats. And then usually there's some kind of a low mid build up, probably from proximity effect, that happens 200, 300 hertz that I'm going to dip out, maybe even as high as 500. But basically I'm trying to remove that to get a bit of the clunk and also the kind of smooth hatsiness words. But really I just want to get a bit of definition in there. Overheads, it depends on the application. If you're using them as cymbal mics, then probably a similar treatment to the hi-hats. No gating or anything like that, I usually don't compress them. If you're using them as an overhead to capture the full kit, then you probably do want to compress it. Be a little more reserved with your filter because you want some of the impact of that snare drum. You don't want to lose the bass in the snare drums, maybe only 100 hertz. And again, you're probably going to need to remove something in the low mids, 500s, between 500 and 1 kilohertz. Can you tell I don't like 500 hertz? That's pretty much the whole kit at this point. If you start coming up against other drums, then just look at the drum, hear the drum, listen, what drum it is nearest. Is it more like a snare? Is it more like a tom? And then apply some of this knowledge to that drum itself. But let's have a quick chat about effects on drums. You probably want to get a room reverb or a hall reverb ready to go on these guys. And then I would recommend putting quite a good amount of reverb on snare drums, a really hefty amount of reverb on toms, and also a bit of reverb on overhead microphones. When you do it in the sound check, it might sound like you've gone completely overkill on these effects, right? But once it's all in the mix, you don't really notice it as much. Have a separate reverb if you can for the drum kit, or at least the instruments. When you mute your vocal reverb when the guitarist or vocalist or whoever is going to speak, you don't want to also suck the life out of the drum kit. Quite often you get people going, thank you, thank you, thank you everyone, with a little more energy after their set is done while the drummer is still playing, and then they do the whole ba-da-doo, you know? And you want that reverb to still be present. So go for like a 2.2 second hall reverb, that's what I say. Check out around here for some other useful videos that YouTube's going to recommend to you.